Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm finally harvesting the Vermibag Mini. And this time when I harvested the Vermibag Mini, I got a weird mix of really wet patches and really dry patches. Some were so crumbly that I was surprised that they were even next to the really wet ones. I did have a lot of clumps again, so I'm gonna try to wet this down and cover it with bubble wrap and keep it covered with bubble wrap to see if that does anything for the castings. I put them in my regular pizza dough tray, and it has the air holes on the side to allow for air circulation so that it doesn't get moldy potentially. But I'm not sure what to do any longer with the Vermibag Mini castings because they're never in a usable form, and I end up just taking them outside and dumping them into my outdoor garden beds. Still helps with the outdoor garden beds, but I wish they were in a more usable form so I can add them to my soil mixes inside. But this is all I usually take out of my Vermibag Mini at once. I don't want to take too much at one time and risk getting any worms in these castings, since they end up going outside ultimately, and sometimes it goes out in the winter, and I don't believe that they would survive in my outdoor beds. Once I finished with the castings that I harvested, I'm going to do a sandwich layer for the top part of the Vermibag Mini. So I didn't get to capture where I put the cantaloupe and the Brussels sprouts in one layer, but this is me putting some new bedding at the top and sprinkling some of the grit because I know I'm going to do a heavy feeding this week, and when I do that in my Vermibag Mini, I get a lot of beetles. So to try to cut down on how many beetles end up being there in the next couple of weeks, I put the grit in this layer, then I'm going to do some more of the new bedding and then more of the grit before finally putting the bubble wrap on and letting this rest for the week. If I check this next week, since I gave it a big filling or feeding and there's still a lot of food, I'm not going to put too much food in there, but I just want to make sure that I bring the level up high enough for all the worms that are in here. And the spin is done. Moving to the first of the regular totes. After coming off a harvest, these totes are looking really good. I do notice that when I am harvesting, if I am going to have any issues, it's going to be right after the harvest with the new bedding if the worms are going to look and try to escape from the bins. Since I don't keep lids on the bins, that means my worms would unfortunately die. I don't keep an eye on this area every day, so I wouldn't know if they were coming out. So I try to prevent that by making sure that the bedding is nice and wet and that I give it enough food. But nothing really major with the first regular tote, so it was set up fine. And then the second regular tote, I have to get out of the habit of fluffing the beds. I am someone that continuously fluffs the bed, and I am pocket feeding. So I'm fighting the urge to scrape in there and move around the bedding, since I am trying to do this as a trash bag style. What I'm noticing is that this is carrying a lot of water, and that could be from the last couple of feedings where I wet the cardboard completely in the water before applying it. But I'm just pocket feeding this a little bit of food on one side, giving it the grit, and leaving it alone for another week. Seems like the worms are happy in here too. No evidence of worm trails. On the Vermibag tote, the first one, this one is super dry again, right along the edges, and kind of where I would expect it to be dry. So I am going to mix this bedding up really well, looking for some of the wetter spots, and then I am going to soak this down a good deal to make sure that it is holding moisture. I'm going to also give it a good size feeding. This is frozen squash, so as it breaks down, it's going to release the water into the bin, and that's really what I wanted to do since these stay wetter. And I'm also making sure that I'm adding new bedding that is thoroughly moistened instead of just dry cardboard as well. I'm going to go all around the perimeter, which is something I don't normally do, and wet the Vermibag tote itself just to see if that makes a difference with the moisture levels in this bin. But again, newly harvested bins, there's not much you're doing to them at first, just making sure the worms aren't escaping. So this one's set up for the week. Now, the second Vermibag tote, I have moved into the hybrid bait process with this, and I had a ton of worms in the bait tray. They were really much all over. I tried to zoom in as best as I could, but there were a lot of worms in that bin, which lets me know, hopefully, fingers crossed, there's a lot of worms that I can get to harvest out. I am going to move away from the old bedding bin for 1 second and move over to the tote that I'm going to be putting the worms into. I am keeping them separate, or keeping the worms separate from their current castings for the time being, because I want to make sure that I have enough time to get all of the worms out. I don't want to feel rushed and have to throw them back into their bin before getting all of the potential juvenile worms out of the bedding. So I'm just scraping this out very gently, making sure that there aren't any worms left behind. And then I am going to put a little bit more food into here because they demolished what was in the tray. Again, another slightly large feeding, because if there are younger worms, I want to make sure that there is enough food in this bin for everyone. And then this is only temporary. I think I have another Vermibag tote that I'm going to move them into so that they're not constricted in this area. But for this portion of it, this is the setup for now. Going back to the Vermibag tote, once I got all the worms out of the bait tray, it's just going back through the process of refilling the bait tray. I moved where it was this week just to try to make sure that I put the bait tray in all areas of this bin to make sure that some worms are actually migrating over to the food. I don't want to miss out, and I'm going to give it a good feeding of frozen foods that should attract the worms into the bait tray as well. So I also gave it its grit and then covered this up to bait the worms out for another week. Hopefully next week will be another success, and I think, like I said, it might be about a good 4 weeks before I consider stopping the bait process with this. Now, if you've gotten this far in the video and you enjoy the content, please like and subscribe. It helps the channel. And as always, thank you so much for watching.